A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby and Rob Norman, the ACL State Director for Queensland, joining us. Hey, Rob, welcome back to 2020.
Always good to be with you, Neil, on this Monday morning in Queensland where it's nice and brisk and cool.
Cooling in Queensland, a little freezing in some other parts in the southern states today. Hey, let's start with gender dysphoria and some Australian guidelines for gender-affirming treatment of gender dysphoria. They've been called into serious question, Rob. What's happened?
Neil, we are experiencing the collapse of a house of cards, and so this is really gaining momentum, the whole gender dysphoria debate, and the way treatments are being performed around Australia are really being called to question, particularly with a recent case in Victoria where really the author of gender affirming care in Australia has been excoriated by the judge in a case where a father has challenged his wife in her quest to have their child transitioned medically. And so it's a big case. The judge has intervened, and basically the father has said that he wants his child to be a child, to grow up in a normal fashion, to go through some of the issues that many children do. Many boys will play with dolls at an early age. Many girls will play with Tonka trucks if they still exist. And so this father has basically challenged his wife's quest to have the child's treatment enacted and come up very well. So it's opened up a Pandora's box, Neil, as there are so many things that rest on this case, including the plight of Dr. Gillian Spencer here in Queensland.
Okay, so just to pause, because it gets complicated, doesn't it? But you've broken that down to something fairly simple. You're the father versus a mother in this case. The mother is happy to have their child go through all sorts of treatments for gender dysphoria, but the father says, hey, wait a minute, I wanted to have a real childhood, and, you know, the evidence goes, doesn't it, that children will find their way through that dysphoria and eventually settle. So you've got a father and a mother in court, and the judge has taken to the author of the Australian Standards of Care and Treatment Guidelines. Now, take us into this, because this, I think, sounds very important.
It is really important. And look, there's been so much going on, Neil, in the last 18 months or so, particularly with the CAS review findings and, you know, the dangers that Dr. Hilary Cass highlighted in her report that came out of the UK that have really shown that there are no benefits to gender affirmation and the treatments behind that. In fact, there are many dangers. So, you know, you've got things like brain development, which happens when hormones kick in, particularly for young boys. Bone density growth. There are many health issues that go through that. And then there is the fact that these treatments are one way, we're finding out now. They're not reversible, as the experts have said. And so this whole house of cards is now being exposed. Interestingly, at the same time that that's been going on, here in Queensland, we have Dr. Gillian Spencer, who's sitting on the reserves bench, you know, effectively been suspended from her employment at the Queensland Children's Hospital because she's one of the brave people that has been speaking out against this. But, Neil, we've known all along, people of faith have known all along that this is just crazy stuff. You know, we've been advised by Professor John Whitehall, who is Professor of Paediatrics at Western Sydney University, all along that boys and girls grow up and they often grow out of their tendency to gravitate towards playing with dolls, as I said earlier, for boys, or with more male-centered things for little girls. Those things come good in 80+% of cases. And so this is a Pandora's box, and we're calling on the Queensland Minister for Health to immediately intervene in the case of Dr. Gillian Spencer. She should receive a medal for her work, not be relegated to the sidelines.
She's the one who's basically called the bluff or recognised the emperor's got no clothes on here, and the thought of dangerously ideological grounds, but she's been suspended from her employment. So looking to now the Queensland Minister for Health, Tim Nicholls, to intervene in the Spencer case. Is there any news from your end at all? Is he open to at least reviewing this and reinstating Dr. Spencer? Anything from your end here, Rob?
All is reasonably quiet. At the moment, your listeners may not be aware of this, but there is a review happening in Queensland at the moment on the whole gender discussion, which we mentioned last week on 2020, actually, and it will involve Dr. Spencer. But effectively, because of what happened in Cairns, because of the fact that children were being transitioned without parental consent or even knowledge in some cases, this whole thing is now under the microscope. Of course, Dr. Spencer is a senior staff specialist in the Children's Hospital in Queensland, and she's been under suspension now for over a year. She's in fact received 4 show cause notices in her employment as to why she should remain an employee of Queensland Health, which is disgusting behaviour, really terrible, because all she's done, Neil, effectively is that she has gone to best practice care for children, which is at odds with current Queensland policy. Of course, the Queensland Gender Services have embraced the gender-affirming care model, which basically says that if children present and they think they are the opposite sex, then treatment should begin immediately. And, of course, Dr. Spencer and others, people like I mentioned before, John Whitehall and Professor or Dr. Andrew Amos in Townsville, all these experts are saying, let's watch these children, let's take the best approach to them, and let's not affirm what is most likely a mental health case. So it's a huge thing, and I think we are witnessing the end of this, hopefully.
You call it a house of cards, and where kids are the victims here and may well have to put up with a lifelong medicalisation because of poor decisions made. No doubt we'll be looking at that closely, and as you say, such an important case, and let's hope this is some sort of resolution. But no doubt, when things are ideologically driven, people who are in the mix here are fearful of being cancelled because of an ideological push for these sorts of things. So it goes quite deep, and it'll be challenging along the way. Hey, let's turn some sights to Victoria. The Victorian government currently conducting a review into its multicultural policies. What's developing in Victoria?
Yeah, this is a positive thing, Neil. And of course, Victoria has a long history of engaging multicultural people. They've, of course, over the years, there's been a large Greek population, there's been Italians. More recently, we're seeing Muslim immigrants and so forth. And so the Victorian government has undertaken to do this review in multiculturalism. We're seeing this as an opportunity because there are many good aspects that come in with other cultures. That's not always good, obviously, but it does give us the opportunity to revisit some of the policies that are currently in place in states like Victoria, which has often led the way. And so what it does, first and foremost, it really raises the issue of vilification laws, for instance, gender-affirming laws, as we've already mentioned, equality laws, etc., where many people that come from overseas, their culture and their religion are intertwined. And so when we start talking about parental rights, that is actually built into Muslim culture. It's built into Christian culture. And so we're calling on the Queensland government to re-look at the way we do vilification laws as one big example. Vilification often weaponizes one culture against another, and obviously that's not a good thing, particularly in the context of Victoria.
It's not an easy thing to resolve. There's this balancing act going on. The balance between what some will say is unjust discrimination with the safeguarding of fundamental freedoms like parental rights. And so these things come around our cultural roots as well. So it's a challenging time getting that balance right, Rob.
It is, Neil. And look, we will always advocate for freedom of speech. We think that is, I think most of our viewers would agree that is one of the underpinnings of Western secular culture, that people have the freedom to speak. And so one of the issues that we hope will come out of this, for instance, is that Victoria might look at a positive right for freedom of speech, particularly in the context of religion and culture, where people are free to talk about their religion, they're free to evangelize, particularly as Christians. We know that that's part of what the Bible commands us to do. We're called to preach the gospel to all creatures. Heaven forbid the day that would not be possible because of anti-vilification laws. So this is a great opportunity. We are engaging in the process, and it could potentially interact with many of the current legislations in Victoria.
This whole thought of freedom of religion in the mix of all of these freedoms that are under threat. I mean, when we talk about freedom of religion, it's freedom to believe what you want to believe and then to be able to speak about that publicly. And so your freedom of speech and all the freedoms around parental rights, really this freedom of religion is much more important than a lot of people tend to think, Rob. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts there, but sometimes it's underrated as the freedom, but we're recognising that as the fundamental freedom because, you know, someone trying to tell me how I can think and what I believe, that really is an intrusion.
Absolutely. And look, we know, you and I both know, Neil, and I think your listeners are probably on board with us here, is that Christianity isn't a silent faith. It requires that the Great Commission commands us to go and preach the gospel to all nations. And so we're committed to doing that. If doing it, dare say that Christianity will continue to preach the gospel, and we'll see people being locked up in jail, ultimately, if that goes down the wrong route. And unfortunately, anti-vilification laws tend to weaponize one culture against another, and people get offended and end up in court and so forth. So one of the big things here is that we must have a positive right for people to speak and in accordance with their religious beliefs. So we'll be definitely fighting for that.
And we don't like it when the disagreements come to blows, when there's some sort of violence or when there's some sort of protests that are happening on the street and people are being hurt. But there needs to be still the freedom to be able to speak up fearlessly and not be brought down by some level of violence. That's a challenging thing in a deepening multicultural society, and the thought that, you know, there are going to be people who disagree, but yes, they should be allowed to disagree. I guess there's going to be a point where you say, well, we don't want this to come to blows, but certainly the robust debates, those things have to happen, don't they, Rob?
They do, in fact. Yeah, that's exactly right, Neil. And it's the Australian way that people discuss issues. I know when I was a little boy, I remember my parents having robust discussions with their friends. And unfortunately, that's something that's being lost because there are so many interventions now, so many laws that cause people to look out for those sorts of things, that we've lost that ability to have a robust debate, to be critical on political issues, to speak about the best and worst of cultural issues. And it's important that we come back to that place. It's important that we enable the population to engage in healthy discussion without fear of being discriminated against.
Sometimes we can be led to think that somebody in control or in authority should be able to put in prison those who have a view that disagrees with my view. I guess there's a level of humility required here for the Christian believer. I think we appreciate and understand that humility is required, that others will have alternate views. We're not calling for the enemies of Christianity to be put behind bars, but when the enemies of Christianity are suggesting that we might be put behind bars, we got to speak up, haven't we?
Yeah. Part of what we also look at in this issue, Neil, is the integration of other cultures. So helping people to understand that we don't solve problems through violence. We solve problems by discussing things, We honour days like Anzac Day. We have a certain patriotism that comes with being an Australian. And so this review basically opens the door for all those possibilities to happen. So we're seeing it as a very positive thing. We're not seeing it as negative. We think it's a step in the right direction for the Victorian government.
And, you know, every now and then you get the debate that emerges around Australian values. And what are Australian values? Well, we've got our own view of Australian values, which goes back into the history of Australia. And perhaps that goes into what people talk about First Nations history. And, of course, those things are all very important. But our Australian values as a since colonisation and Australia becomes this state and all of the things that we've worked through in all of that, somehow or other, some people have to be able to recognise what the values are that have been created so that we can have a future that is in some level of harmony. If we don't actually agree on those Australian values, the debate goes on and conflict goes on. So agreeing on Australian, just a quick thought from you, agreeing on Australian values so that you might move forward in harmony. That's got to be where our leaders and our authorities need to be looking.
Yeah, I agree. And look, the vast majority of immigrants come to Australia because of our Australian values. I have no doubt about that.
Well, Rob, I'm going to point people to the ACL website, and there might be some more information there or some articles, some resource that listeners can actually look to on those sorts of things. acl.org.au, acl.org.au. They've got their own end of financial year appeal going at the moment. You can get weekly e-news when you subscribe there at acl.org.au, and you can follow on social media, AC Lobby. Rob Norman is the ACL State Director for Queensland. Rob, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
Always appreciate being on, mate. God bless you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.